Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, we'll have 2 questions from listeners and 2 interviews today. I'll be joined by Julia, and we'll answer a question from Cortnie from Connecticut. And she's heard from her student counselor that her son's school has been blacklisted and students aren't taking anybody from her school. And she wants to know, do colleges actually blacklist certain high schools? So Julia will join me to answer that. Then Susan will join me for part 2 of 2. We'll answer 2 questions, one from Carter, a student in the Virginia area, and then also from an anonymous listener who's listened to every episode. And both of them have asked questions about preparations for pre-med. So we're answering them both together. We had part 1 last week. We'll have the final part today. Then we have a brand new interview that Lisa will do, and it's with Adrienne Amador-Oddi, and she's the VP of Enrollment at Queen's University in Charlotte, and we're talking about common misperceptions about financial aid and scholarships. It'll be a 2-parter, and you'll hear part 1 today. And then an interview I was going to do on Monday, but we had some tech issues with Linda's interview, so I moved this interview to today, and it is with the president of Kettering University, Bob McMahan. It's a 2-hour interview, so we'll chunk it out into 24-minute segments, and you'll hear it over the next 5 weeks. And today you'll hear part 1 of 5.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia, this is another good one.
It is.
And shout out to Cortnie from Connecticut. By the way, I want to say something. You know, we will take any question. We so appreciate when you guys send questions in. And if you're most comfortable just saying anonymous, we'll take your question. We would much rather you do that than not do that. But if you are comfortable at least saying your state, it does sort of help. So if you want to stay anonymous, if you're comfortable saying anonymous, like Mom from Minnesota, I still think that protects your anonymity. But it's just kind of nice for us on the other end to know, oh, this is Alaska, this is Hawaii, this is New Jersey. So once again, if you're not comfortable with that, still send in questions. But if you're willing to out yourself, we appreciate it. So thank you, Cortnie.
Yes.
All right, let's play the question, and then Julia, take it where you want to go.
Hi, Mark and the YCBK team. This is Cortnie from Connecticut. First, I wanted to tell you that I teach a high school elective on public speaking where I have students participate in a mock interview. This year, I was inspired by your interview with Dawn Williamson during episodes 519, 521, and 523. Subsequently, I had students practice their active listening and note-taking skills while listening to that interview in its entirety. After, we debriefed and students incorporated their newly acquired knowledge into their preparation for their presentations. The result was nothing short of fantastic. I was so proud of them. I can't thank you and Ms. Williamson enough for giving high school students such valuable and relevant and timely information. Now, on to my question. My stepson, who is a junior at one of the top-ranked high schools in Southern Connecticut, or public high schools, I should say, in Southern Connecticut, is currently researching and visiting many very selective colleges in the Northeast. Over dinner, when I suggested a particular college to consider, he said to me verbatim, quote, "It's a waste to apply there. My guidance counselor told me that blank school doesn't accept anyone from my high school," end quote. His comment got me thinking, are there certain high schools, even public high schools, private high schools, doesn't matter, but certain high schools that are blacklisted from particular selective or very selective colleges? If so, for what reason? The fact that guidance counselors are advising against schools based on acceptance history is unsettling and sort of perplexing. I'd love to get your take on this. Thanks again for all that you and your team do for parents and students alike.
I am so thankful Cortnie asked this question because as a school-based counselor for the last 9 years, I actually have this conversation very frequently, mostly around Duke University, where everyone's like, oh, I guess your school doesn't have a good relationship with Duke because no one gets in, right? Like, so I'll say a few things knowing that I don't know what the actual truth is. But if I were a betting woman, I cannot think in my time of being in admissions or on the high school side that there's any high schools that are, quote, blacklisted by certain colleges, right? So that a certain high school lands on my desk as an admission officer. I'm like, nope, definitely not going to consider anyone. I absolutely do think high school reputation does play a part in this, especially if you're in the high-powered area of Connecticut, right? You have very strong public schools and you have more than enough independent schools to choose from if you're able to do so. So it is definitely a very high-octane area where you do have an overrepresentation of people applying to selective schools. And so it does get a little more competitive from there. The only reason I could ever think, and this has happened, it hasn't happened, my high school's never been blacklisted, but every now and then I'm sure counselors have this conversation often, but if you have more than one student not abide by the admissions policies of the school, like for example, we have multiple students apply early decision to a certain school, they get in and then don't honor their ED agreement, which they're supposed to, then maybe that college might sour on my high school and be very wary of admitting other people. But I cannot perceive a dean of admission or VP of enrollment sitting in the committee room being like, under no circumstances do we take a child from this high school, right? So what I'm assuming is more what the counselor is saying. And granted, this is also most of my conversations is that I'll have a conversation with your child, your student, and it lands or is interpreted very differently by the time it meets the family, right? So I sincerely hope there are no counselors that say, don't bother applying, no one gets in from this school. But it could be that the counselor is looking at all of the data and there is just no one that has your student's profile that has been successful in admission. And especially when you're coming from a high octane area, I find that these lists get more and more out of control. So if we've got a school that I know the child just really has no chance at based on the history of students with that GPA and profile applying to schools. Right now, for example, I'm doing listing with my 11th graders, and I've actually went to put in their college lists into their platform, and I went to do scattergrams at about 5 of the colleges because I was like, I'm very sure no one with this GPA has been admitted, but let me just go check before I let the student know that this is an unlikely college. I couldn't even find the data because no one near that GPA had ever been in. This is 20 years of data. No one has ever been admitted with that low of a GPA, even recruited athletes or development cases. So not to say that might be your student, but it could be that between the historical data and the profile of the student, that the counselor is basically saying like, this is not a good use of your time or money, and certainly won't be helpful to the student's mental health come March or early decision release. So I don't think any high school is blacklisted. I do think some high schools are overrepresented in selective in colleges. So it's not that they don't want to take everyone and anyone, but that they've seen a lot of students from there, so they know what the best of the best is coming from that high school. So I don't think anyone is blacklisted, and I sincerely hope no counselors out there are saying, like, don't even bother applying because our high school is blacklisted. It could likely just be, hopefully, the counselor trying to be thoughtful and making sure the schools on your child's application list are thoughtful and will yield good results, or are sort of responsible applying, right? It's not going to really hurt the child come March.
No, I agree with everything you said, Julia. I mean, colleges really try hard to look at each student in the context they're coming from and think about the student from the student's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're looking at things that way. And so that's the only time I could ever think of, like you did, that a school might sour on another school for a year or two, maybe, to send them a message, don't burn us on ED.
Yep.
If it happens multiple times. And that, even that doesn't happen that often. It'd have to be pretty egregious violations. Like,
yes, and multiple from the school.
Multiple times you're not getting the message across to your students that when you sign that waiver for ED,
right,
we expect that to be honored.
Yeah.
But this would be very rare. Like Julia said, this would be multiple times. And even if that happened, even if it did, it would be more of a temporary thing. It's not going to be like forever.
Exactly.
Now, I will say this. I've just encountered this a lot, and especially with newer counselors. And this is all types of counselors. I'm thinking a lot of IECs here, but it could apply to any newer counselor. Sometimes a newer counselor, they see someone who looks like an absolute and total rock star, and then they don't get into certain places, and they can't believe that school didn't take that kid, when if they were reading all the files, they would understand it.
Totally.
Yeah, because it's the whole thing Julie and I have talked about a lot. Like, you may be standard strong, or just in that applicant pool, you're a big fish in your pond, but in the national landscape. Like, I wasn't surprised at all that Julia says she gets this with Duke a lot, because if you understand how Duke admissions works, very few kids are getting in there without a unique institutional priority, without being hooked.
Right.
And it's not just Duke. Like, when you have these schools that are so selective that they have so many high octane kids, their mindset is, well, who's bringing something that we need that we don't have?
Right.
And if you're not doing that, you're not going to stand out. And I've just had many, many conversations over the year with younger counselors that have made comments like, you're not going to believe it, this school didn't take this kid. And that could be, like, it's always perceived as they did my kid wrong kind of thing.
Exactly.
When they really would have a different perspective if they read files at that school, or if they understood how institutional priorities impact decisions. I don't know that's the case here. I prefer your explanation because it's more gracious to the counselor. You're saying maybe the counselor is just trying to gently, but the thing is, Cortnie did say the student was at the top of the class, and it's probably a really good school. So, you never know. Like, normally a kid like that, you wouldn't necessarily counsel them out. You would just tell them to level set your expectations.
Exactly. And it's not personal.
For example, to use Duke, we see kids all the time that have numbers as good as your numbers could be, and they don't get in because they're just not standing out in that pool. I'll see that with Georgia Tech. And people are surprised. I remember Rick saying to me 5 years ago, 28,000 kids had BC Calc.
Right.
So when I tell people that, they're like, whoa, almost 30,000 kids had BC Calc? Like, it's just nothing. Like, right? So it could be that, but it really highly, highly, highly unlikely that there's blacklisting going on. Because blacklisting is just not a student-centric approach, right?
No.
Like just in the same way where we always say that colleges look at you through the prism of the school you're coming from, and they take into consideration if this is a school that doesn't have APs, or this is a school that says you can't only take 5 APs through your whole high school career, and 2, 1 in 10th and 2 in 11th and 2 in 12th. Well, they're not going to compare that to the other kid that has 15. So they really try to have policies that don't hurt the student.
Right.
And it really would be petty and juvenile and hurting the student. And it would be their loss also, because they'd be losing out on talent.
Yes. Especially coming from a high octane place. What if you got a good football player? You have a really very underrepresented student that applies. Like, they're not going to all of a sudden be like, oh, I guess we'll take someone from this school this year, right? It's not in their interest either to do that.
Yeah, and the high octane, the reason why that comes up is because, like, those are perpetual feeders.
Yes. You rely on those app fees.
Yeah, you rely on them. That's how this kind of relates, right? Like, why you would want to burn bridges there is just not in your best interest.
No.
I mean, it's not in your best interest anywhere, but it's especially not in your best interest at places that are reliable feeders of really good kids.
Yes. And I hope, too, our listeners who maybe your child or you are at a high school that has 4% going to a 4-year college, it also doesn't work the other way, right? It doesn't mean that because you don't have a lot of history of a strong track record does not mean you're at a disadvantage, right? A college is going to look at what markers do you have outside of the resources you were given that show that you might be pretty successful here, right? So also, it's not just like you come from an underperforming high school, so that means you won't be considered. So I hope people know that too.
No, I think that's important. And like anything we say, there's always nuance because so I asked Bach in my interview with Swarthmore recently whether they do research on how kids from certain schools do.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Yeah.
And whether they factor that into admission decisions.
Yeah, we did that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And he did say, like, not so much in the individual school, but he said there are some school districts that kids just have not done well. Now, these tend to be schools where the preparation isn't great and it hasn't resulted in a track rate of success. But Joe's point is still really important. They still will take a kid from there, but the bar's just higher if the last 3 kids that you took, flunked out, then you might look for certain things as indicators that this person can be successful because past kids from there have not transitioned well.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love talking with you about this stuff, Julia.
Yeah, no, it's really
almost all the time, and when we disagree, it's fun. You know that?
Agreed.
And listeners, you should know this. And this is true for Julia. It's true for Susan. It's true for Lisa. It's true for Vince. It's true for anybody in our question for a listener rotation. Hillary. We don't talk ahead of time about what our answers are.
No.
We just look at the question. We know we bring our own experience and background. And when I come in here, I'm finding out for the first time what Julia thinks. Of course, most of the time I know just from knowing her and knowing admissions. But every once in a while you get a surprise. But so this stuff's not orchestrated on our part. We don't have time in our schedule to have pre-meetings about everything. So we wing it.
We just riff.
Yeah, we just rip. Awesome. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
So, friends, last week, Susan and I answered the first part of the questions that came in from Carter and our anonymous listener on preparation for pre-med. And in case you missed that, or if you are like me and you forget things, we're going to play the questions again so you'll understand the context.
Hi, I want to thank you for all of your wisdom and advice and your education through all your podcasts. I think I may have listened to every single one of them. So that brings me to my question. If my student is not sure they want to do the pre-med track when they submit their application senior year of high school, can they wait until they are enrolled and then decide at that time if they want to do the pre-med track? Are there any schools that won't permit this? What are your thoughts and advice on this? Would be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Carter and I'm a junior from Virginia. I'm interested in the pre-med track in college and I'm putting together my preliminary college list. My question is specifically for Susan Tree. My dad played episode 495 for me, and in that episode, Susan said that she will now reveal the schools that her students should consider for pre-med, as these schools do not support all their pre-med students. And my question is, would Susan let the YCBK audience know which schools she was talking about? This would greatly help me and others in the pre-med track with our college research. Thank you in advance and keep up the great work.
Now, one thing I do find, I would tell anybody this, I'm sure you probably agree, but if not, I know you'll speak up. I find there's so many statistics that get thrown around that are, I think, so misused and so fraught to manipulation in admissions. You know, one of the ones is, I'm going off topic here, but of course I just coming out from Texas where I'm hearing this all the time. The percentage of people that are like gainfully employed within 6 months.
Oh,
when school says 96 and one says 95. I've pressed some of these schools. So if someone's working at Starbucks part-time, does that count? Well, you know, they never really want to stand by what constitutes gainfully employed. But that's one of those stats that I find is really manipulated. And I brought that up because the other one that I find gets manipulated a lot is the percentage of people that get into med school.
That's right. How are they counting those?
92. And I heard a lot of 92, 93. You know, Haverford, which we know is an incredibly strong school, but they used to say 100.
Right.
And somebody else who you and I work together with, I'll give you a hint. You'll probably remember this. They did. Oh, you were not happy they never got into Williams. Remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
I knew you would. You let Williams know. But they ended up going to Haverford and then going off to med school, right?
And is a practicing physician in the Philadelphia area.
There you go. Great person. So I was having a conversation with him after maybe he was halfway through his time at Haverford. And I was like, this is when I was a lot more naive back then. I was like, 100% acceptance rate in a medical school. That is incredible. I don't know anybody else that has that. And then he said, you want to know why they have 100%? There is an advisor there that is so honest with you. And after a certain point, she pulls you aside and she says, I think we need to go in a different direction. Right. So that's where they get that. And that actually happened to one of my students. You know this person as well. The best friend was on the soccer team at Haverford. They'd come from the same middle school, my advisee, and then went off to Haverford, and then it just wasn't for them, and so they ended up going into now
right.
they're PhD and did all kinds of great stuff with their lives. But so that's a stat that I find is manipulated because generally somebody's counseling you out. You know, it's kind of like one of my pet peeves, Susan, when people say on the college counseling side, when they say 90% of our schools get in one of their top 3 choices.
I know. Well, that's a lot of nonsense.
It's nonsense because the public hears that is, okay, so if Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are my top 3, you're telling me I have a 95% chance of one of those? And we know what happens. No, at some point you sit down and say, we need to rebuild your list. And then you count your rebuilt list as one of the top 3, right? That's how that game works. And I find you have to be careful with that stat.
Right. Very disingenuous.
Yeah. And everybody's trying to outnumber each other. And I get why they do it because I'll never forget this. I was working with a student from New York City. She had done admitted student visit programs at BU and Northeastern. And I'm not going to say which one, but the mom told me afterward, one of the 2 of them had all kinds of stats about their success. And the other one didn't. And it was in the context of, if that other one had the numbers, why didn't they share them? I'm so impressed that this other one. Oh, yeah, she bought it. She bought it hook, line, and sinker. It was, we're number this for that. We're number this for that. We're this, that, you know. And I mean, I feel for schools. It's competitive out there. They're trying to separate themselves. But I mean, you and I see through the marketing.
Well, and, also another factor in pre-med is that there are a lot of students who will do a master's degree right after their bachelor's degree. Maybe they'll do it in chemistry. Maybe they'll do it in neuroscience, but they'll get that extra year of academic preparation. And at the same time, if they need to do more work for their MCAT, they do. But that's a tremendous credential.
Mm-hmm.
And that really elevates a student's access to medical schools and perhaps to the ones that they want. So that particular student might not be counted in the I applied as a senior in college. The faculty may have said, do a master's degree, get a job, work in the lab, work on your MCAT, and they know exactly how to get that student to that next level and have the outcome that they want.
You know what else has really impressed me, Susan, is these programs that have like the mentored undergraduate research to them.
Yeah.
Like the College of Worcesters, the Occidentals,
Yep.
or the ones that even like have a senior level theses assigned. Maybe sometimes it's the honors college or whatever. Because
tremendous credentials.
Yeah, because what that pre-med student is able to do with that, not only can they really go deep in some area of medical research or some area, but there's also so much interaction with faculty that
Yes.
they're setting themselves up to get some lovely recommendation letters. So
You're
when
right.
I look at those places, those are places that, to use this term, I feel like punch above their weight class. Like if like they do end up with really strong med school placements, more so than you would think for the selectivity of the school.
That's right.
And they've really set so those kind of experiential opportunities that to either do research, to work closely with people, those kinds of things carry a lot of weight, and you can also show your passion, depth, passion, and then the combination of a couple people that can vouch for you.
That's right.
So those are some of the things that I'd like Carter to think about.
Well, the other thing I noticed in doing some research with one of my students this year who was all about, planning for medical school admission, he's a senior in high school, was medical schools on their websites will spell out what they're looking for in an applicant, just the way that colleges have mission statements. Mm-hmm. Medical schools will too. And all of the ones that I looked at with this student talked about community health and public health. So just like I was saying, years ago, there was an anti-specialist emphasis going on to bring more general practitioners into the profession. Now there's very clearly concern about public health and community health. So what I would say to, Carter is be sure you're looking, just, start using the medical program, the medical school websites to look a little bit about what they say they're looking for in an applicant, aside from, what Mark and I've just been talking about, the coursework and the research and the MCAT. But I was really amazed. Now, some of this may be tied to funding, right? And that's, of course, there's so much jeopardy right now around that. But take a look and see, Carter, what the medical colleges themselves are saying that they're, valuing and looking for.
Yeah, and for the person that's looking at sort of really highly selective, highly competitive medical programs, College Transitions puts out a really good list. And I share it with all of my students. They put out 2 lists, actually. They put out schools that send the most people. Now, mind you, they're focusing on 25 highly selective schools, but, that's important to some people. So for whom the people that's important, they put out a raw list, but the one I like is they put out the per capita list, where they've adjusted it to the size of the student body.
Ah.
And I like to look at that, especially looking for hidden gems of schools that maybe are not super uber selective that make it in there. And you'll see a mixture between, of course, you do have a lot of the brand names because this kid that gets in that super selective school tends to just be really strong overall,
of course.
Right? So you're going to see a lot of that. And sometimes another thing that's interesting is sometimes it seems like schools do like it when people have done the undergraduate at their school, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want a diversity of
That's
different.
right.
But then there are places like I find Dartmouth, Duke, and Miami would be 3 examples. I find they really tend to like their kids that have come through their own. That doesn't mean they're not taking people from all over the country, but I see sometimes students have better success there than they would applying out. And sometimes they've literally said that to them. Like, you've gone through our program.
Yeah.
And I've
Well, and
seen that.
partially because of the experience that those undergraduates can get and the recommendations that may come from faculty members who are connected to the medical school.
Hmm. Yeah, Miami's got some really good things. They have a PRISM program, which is for pre-meds, and they have foot fellows. And I've had students go through and do both the PRISM and foot fellows, and then they end up getting into Miami's medical school. And they that's a nice little setup system. I think it's a little bit of an underrated gem out there that's kind of may not be the first name people think of, but they've got a really good program there for people that want to go in that path. Any other schools of note? I mean, I know on that list, like of liberal arts schools, I know Davidson, Bowdoin, Pomona all made the highest per capita kids getting into med schools, and then of course it's some of the ones that you'd expect.
Rhodes, for me,
Yes.
has always
Oh,
been, I think, an example of a
I was going to bring Rhodes
spectacular.
up earlier.
Yeah. It's a small liberal arts college in a city setting surrounded by hospitals.
Well, the thing with Rhodes, and I almost brought them up earlier, the St. Jude's Hospital's there.
Yes.
And they have a special relationship where the Rhodes students get to work at St. Jude's.
Yeah.
And the like schools that set up that. Another one that's I've really been impressed with is St. Louis Medical Science Program. SLU. Loyola, Holy Cross. Like these ones are all like really strong that fly a little bit under the radar. Loyola Chicago.
Yes.
Loyola Chicago is really, really good. Holy Cross, definitely. And SLU. Those are a couple, in general, a lot of the Jesuit schools, they have such a change the world mindset. So they tend to locate in cities, and there's a lot of emphasis on medicine or health science careers as well as education.
That's right. A lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I don't know as much about Boston College. I'm gonna when I visit there, I want to kind of learn a little bit more about their program. I'm not as familiar with how well they do on that, but we talked about Georgetown earlier.
I think Villanova's connections, again, the Catholic tradition of education for others gets them very connected into community health.
Yeah, it just feeds into that, and you'll see that with the Santa Claras, and this even that San Diego is not a Jesuit school; it's Catholic in that Catholic change maker tradition. But I'm glad you highlighted Rhodes. I think that is such an underrated gem. Anyone else that we're not thinking? I'm trying to kind of throw out a range of like across different selectivity tiers too, because that's just important, right? Not everybody has to go to the most selective school to get on that medical school pathway.
Yep. Morehouse.
Yeah, Morehouse. I mean, Xavier in Louisiana is just, African Americans. It's like every single year it produces more African Americans that go to med school.
That's right.
Any other school. The only year it didn't was Katrina. So they're a powerhouse. Spelman and Morehouse have both been good. Howard has been really, really good within HBCUs. I know we're forgetting a bunch. We won't be able to list them all, but just sharing some of the places where we've seen a lot of success. Friends, after Susan and I were done recording, I thought of a whole bunch of other schools that have a great track record of sending students to medical school, at least from my experience. So I just want to mention some more schools. For public schools, I would definitely put UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham on that list, Pittsburgh, Florida, Iowa, Georgia, Wisconsin, University of California at Davis. Those are some that immediately come to mind. For private schools, I would include Tufts, BU, Boston University, Emory, Case Western Reserve in Ohio, Tulane in New Orleans, Miami and Coral Gables, University of Rochester, Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Haverford College, and Creighton in Nebraska. Now, that's not an exhaustive list, just some schools that came to mind where I've seen a lot of success for undergraduates applying to med school. Once again, if you want to see a list of the 25 most selective colleges that send the most kids to the 25 most selective medical schools in the country, just Google top feeders to selective medical schools and put college transitions in that search, and you're going to find two lists. Make sure you focus on the one that looks at per capita because it takes school size into consideration. It even tells you which med schools they send the most students to. And this data was partially gleaned from studying LinkedIn profiles. It's a common profession. Like, I was thinking about this. I'm sure you find the same thing, Susan. Like, what are the most common professions you work with? Tons of people that want to be doctors, lots of people that want to do business, lots of people that want to do engineering, comp sci. Like, those are three of the big ones.
Although I have to admit, I think there's a little bit of disenchantment with the medical profession right now because of how corporate medical practices have become. We're seeing basically the end of the independent doctor model.
You keep saying things that tee me up. So I almost said this earlier. Remember when I said I wanted to bring Dave up for two reasons?
Yes.
So I only mentioned the one. One was the fact that he was an international relations major. But the other is, and we spoke the other day. So he's working on doing he's working on an interview I'm going to do with him on how the medical profession has changed.
Oh, interesting.
And what you need to know if you want to be a doctor.
Fabulous.
And what you just said is a huge part of what he wants to talk about. It's basically been taken over by private equity.
Oh, it is. It's very corporate. We've seen the loss of a lot of independent practice physicians. And I guess what I would say to Carter and our mom is, don't just think about becoming a doctor. Don't just think about medical school. Think about all the other adjacent professions that students should consider, because there are a lot of options within the world of healthcare and medicine where students can really plug in, get a lot of satisfaction, make good money, and make a difference in their communities. So, keep looking at the broader health sciences and not just that linear medical school or bust.
Susan, I still find, though, and I'm sure you're the same way, we work with a lot of doctor families. I don't know why it took me so long to figure this out. I kept wondering, why are there so many doctor families? And finally I realized, they're together for 4 years during those formative years, right? Sparks fly. So there's tons of doctor marriages out there, dentist marriages. I do find a lot of them do want to be doctors. Like, I don't find that many of the parents dissuade them from that. I do see that with other professions. Like, if I'm working with journalists tend to dissuade their kids from going into journalism because of how journalism has changed. But most of them still find that they've enjoyed it. It's been rewarding. It's been fulfilling. And they're quite pleased that their kids want to go into it. I don't get that many. I get it sometimes. I don't get it that often where someone says, you don't want to do that anymore.
I don't know. I think the issue is a lot of high school kids don't have enough hands-on experience to understand the different medical professions. And there's
true.
The TV version of, I'm a doctor, I am all about patient care and seeing a patient from A to Z, from holistic understanding through diagnostic, through treatment, through lifestyle. And you know what? That's doctors. And I'll be interested in Dave's presentation on this, Mark, because he's an expert. But a lot of doctors now only swoop in for touch points during that longer process.
Well, he's going to talk about that too, because the expanded role of PAs and nurse practitioners.
Right. The whole team approach.
Well, part of it is because it's the only way they can make money, because the insurance companies are taking so much that
that's why they are going into corporate medicine.
Medicine's going but they also, you need to run either a high volume practice where you can, it's tough. I was having a conversation with my own doctor. He was just very frustrated with, the more the insurers take it, it forces you to either not spend that much time with the patient.
Absolutely.
Or take a pay cut from what you're used to taking, because they keep taking more and more and more. And, he's that kind of guy. I like to really sit down. But I've also had other doctors where they're just in and out with you.
Oh, absolutely.
You can just tell it's so, they're trained to come in. I remember when I had soldiers had a torn rotator cuff 6 years ago. And Man, that guy, he was in and out so fast. Every time, I'd come in, I want to talk to him. I'm very inquisitive. I want to ask questions. Bang, you come in, smile, personable. Next thing, he's popping to another person.
You get your 3 minutes and then
Yeah,
they're
in
done.
3 minutes, you're doing well. So anyway, we're getting off. But hopefully we gave our anonymous, never missed an episode listener. I always mention that because it just inspires us to know that
it sure does.
Our labor is not in vain. We're putting material out and people are going back and finding it. And Carter, we love it when students ask questions. So hopefully we gave you guys some food for thought. Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome.
And thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review for sending in that SpeakPipe question, you are going to get your choice of one of the following 4 books: College Admissions 101, Essays That Kicked Apps, The Best 390 Colleges, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to send me an email at mark@schoolmatch4u.com, put Princeton Book Giveaway in the subject line, and in the body of the email, put the title of the book you want and put the episode number where we discussed your question and just share a brief description of the question that you asked. Friends, last week I forgot to let the 4 people whose questions we answered, we've never had 4 questions in one episode ever, that they are entitled to the Princeton Review offer. Just if I ever forget that, any listener who ever sends in a question, or if it's a comment that we read from episode 500 on, just know you're entitled to one of the Princeton Review books until they run out. We've got about 80 left of the 100 that they're sending to our listeners.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, over the next couple of weeks, you're in for a treat. Lisa is going to interview Adrienne Amador-Oddi, who's the VP of Enrollment at Queen's University. We'll be clarifying some misperceptions around financial aid. And then a little later in the year, you'll also hear her do a college spotlight for us on Queen's University. So this is a 2-parter. And in part 1, Adrienne shares why financial aid is important to her personally. She tells us what SAI and EFC are, and she explains how those terms are calculated. Lisa and Adrienne have a great conversation about why financial aid is so confusing, especially when you're talking about colleges that require the CSS profile. Lisa and Adrienne talk about a school with an expensive sticker price and how it may end up costing you the same as your state's public school. Adrienne talks about appealing an aid award, and she talks about how important it is for family to be very specific in their request when they are asking for additional money. And then she does something which we've never had anybody do, and I thought was really helpful. She gives a very concrete example of what a conversation would look like between a family and an admission office and financial aid office if they're asking for reconsideration on the original financial offer. I think you're going to enjoy part 1. Listen and enjoy.
Hi, this is Lisa, one of the co-hosts of Your College Bound Kid, and I am very excited today to be here with Adrienne Amador-Oddi, who is a nationally recognized expert in college access and enrollment and is currently leading Queen's admissions and marketing efforts as Vice President of Strategic Enrollment and Communications. Welcome to the podcast. We're really happy to have you.
Thanks. I'm excited to be with you today.
Right. And, she has also worked as the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Trinity College in Connecticut and worked at Berry College and University of Rochester and Kenyon College in Ohio. So you've been all over the place, it seems like.
I just like to go up and down the east side of the country, try
I
out
would-
different residential colleges, little break with the Tier 1 Research University of Rochester, and then back to small residential college land.
Well, we could probably have you back just to talk about your experiences and what you think the differences and advantages of all these different colleges, because it is a very diverse group. But I mean, clearly this means that you have a lot of experience in the subject that we're going to talk about today, which is clarifying some terms regarding financial aid. And I know in our pre-interview, you mentioned this was like a cause near and dear to your heart. Can you tell us more about why this is important to you?
Sure. I think the cost of college and its value is something that people have weighed heavily for the nearly 20 years I've been doing this work, but increasingly the descendants, the folks questioning the value of higher education have gotten a little louder. The costs of college, like everything, it seems like these days have gone up significantly, and the ways in which colleges and universities are trying to help price the experience for individual families is incredibly varied. You mentioned the many different universities I worked for all had very different pricing plans to meet students and families where they are. And so, if I'm a family navigating this process and am not working and thinking about this 24/7 and have not done it for tens and thousands of people, it can be really, really confusing because we all use similar terms and similar approaches, but act on those terms and approaches in really different ways. And so I think it's really important for families to know what agency they have and what questions to ask so that folks can make a really good not only experiential fit but also financial fit, because
Yes.
this is a big investment for any family at any price level of time and resources. And so making sure people know how to prepare for that experience and navigate it is really important for me. Financial aid certainly helped me make college happen, make it happen for my family. So it's something I've been thinking about for my entire career, and really drawn to helping families figure it out.
Yeah. Well, it is really complicated. It's like you're making this like major purchase, right? But the price is really opaque and complicated. And I know a lot of times, we get these financial aid letters as parents, and it's really hard to figure out what they mean. And, I've been doing this for a while. And so when a client hands me a financial aid letter, sometimes I'm like, I have to stare at it for a while and be like, wait, what? To really parse it through. And I can only imagine what families who this is their first brush with all of this experience. And it seems to me like the thing that I see is like the most shocking to people is that they get a number, like an SAI number, and they think that that's all they have to pay. And so, but you and I were talking, it's not that simple. So can you talk more like what that is? Like what is financial need and how is it determined?
Sure. And so you mentioned SAI, which for folks new to the game, that stands for Student Aid Index. If you've been doing this for a little bit longer, had an older student go through the process, you may have heard the word expected family contribution. That certainly made it seem like that's what families would be paying when we were using those words. All of the formulas have changed, all of the math behind the scenes has changed, and we've changed our language to help families understand that student aid index is really a number that colleges and universities are using to get a better sense of individual families' finances, and then try to set a price that's going to work both for the student and family and the college and university. And so some people, like you were mentioning, they'll get what is called a student aid index, an SAI, from filling out the free application for federal student aid. Some people think filling that out, the FAFSA, is just for federal aid, and it certainly helps, but so many colleges and universities are using this SAI to help understand your family's individual family need. So we take our total price, and for residential colleges, that means tuition and fees and room and board. We want you to be on campuses. If we're offering housing, it means students are connecting and plugging in a little bit more than they would be if they weren't living on campus. So we'll take that price. And to make things simple, we'll say that price is $50,000 all in tuition and fees, room and board. And then whatever your family's SAI is, let's call it $10,000. Then we take that $50,000, which is a college's price, subtract the $10,000 SAI, and get a need that is $40,000. Now, some schools will meet that need. And so, through a combination, usually of scholarships, grants, oftentimes a federal student loan, which is a pretty modest amount. And I've got a lot of families who are worried about debt. And there's some level of debt that could be really, really challenging. A couple of $1,000s a year to help make things a little bit more affordable is generally not going to set a student up for financial failure when they graduate. So, schools that are meeting need are typically doing so by using a couple $1,000s of loans and then coming up with scholarships and grants to meet that $40,000. Some schools, most schools in the country aren't in a position to meet financial need, but that doesn't mean that the college is completely and totally unaffordable for a lot of people. And I hate when students and families limit themselves to just a few schools in the country. I mean, it's around 100 out of 4,000 universities that are able to meet. And so
Yeah.
that's really limiting some choices. And for schools that
Well,
don't, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, and it's hard to get into those schools. Like they're not options
Yes,
for the vast majority of American students. And
right.
just like they calculate what they think need is differently than the SAI because they use something called the CSS Profile, which is a more detailed financial aid form that is put out by the College Board. And they all have different formulas. So some might take your house equity and some don't, and so
Yes,
their definition of need might not be your definition of need either. And that just makes it even more confusing. So even though they're meeting demonstrated need, it might end up being the same price as like a school that doesn't claim to meet demonstrated need.
absolutely. That's a really great point. And I think it is important for families to know that colleges are defining need, right? I talked about the simplest way colleges are defining need using an SAI. You mentioned the CSS profile, which has exponentially more complicated formulas associated with it because it gives the universities even more information, which sometimes is really helpful. About a third of families who fill out the profile end up demonstrating greater need, but that also means about two-thirds of families show more resources that they can leverage in a variety of different ways to invest in college. So it adds more layers and complexity and makes a process that is already incredibly abstract even more abstract. And I don't want to be discouraging here. It's really all about how we can use all of our collective resources, college and university resources, family resources, resources from philanthropy or community, state, federal government, and maximize the opportunities we can offer students kind of globally within our applicant pools. So for any one family, there could be more or less need, bigger, smaller bill, and we're asking for all of this information because we are really trying to see what we can do to make college a reality for as many students as possible. So I hope that helps people feel a little bit better about the complexity, even though
Well,
it doesn't make
yeah.
it less complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated, but you mentioned that people should consider a variety of schools. And I also would say I see this with students. Maybe they feel like they can't go to a private school. They think they see the $80,000 price tag and think, well,
Right,
that's never going to work out. But it might end up being like around the same price as their in-state public, or even less in some
right.
situations, just to make it a little more confusing. But tell us some ways that colleges can help families. So we've got that family, they got $40,000. What can a college do to help that family pay that bill?
Sure. So there's so many different options that families can ask about in order to help make whatever the bill is, whether it's $10,000 or there are some colleges now that are $100,000 or will be next year, right? And very few people just send a wire or write a check for the whole amount for a year. And so colleges and universities certainly help families by offering a bunch of different payment plans. Many colleges and universities will negotiate on price with families. So folks in my seat often get frustrated when people come and ask for more or different money or for reconsideration. And for me, from my perspective, I see that as a sign of a family trying really hard to make it work. Like, we must be somewhere in the ballpark if a family is going to invest their time in trying to make college a reality. So even before we get to bills and payment plans, families should feel every agency to ask if there's a reconsideration process. And some schools will just say no, but many schools will say yes and will help walk you through what that process is. It is tremendously helpful if families are specific in their ask. Sometimes people get really nervous about it, but if I'm working with a family and their bill is $40,000 and they ask me for more, that could be $5,000 more. It could be $35,000 more. It's in many ways very easy for me to say yes to $5,000 more. It becomes increasingly hard as the amount increases, just like it's hard for a family to gets increasingly harder for a family to say yes as the amount increases. It's the same sort of hard. We're all in this together, trying to find the middle ground that is going to make everybody feel good and is going to be a sound financial plan for college. So certainly worth, especially the private schools, asking for reconsideration, highlighting some circumstances that maybe a family wants admissions and or financial aid to pay attention to. It doesn't have to be a new thing. It could just be more context in a family environment that no form, even the more complicated profile form, is not going to be able to capture. So that additional context is incredibly helpful for admissions officers. And so in our example of, we've got a $40,000 bill, I've got a parent or a student, sometimes both, calling and saying, we really want to be at, I'll use Queens as an example. We're so close to making it work, but my sister is a sophomore at UNC Charlotte, and I've got a little brother who is playing club lacrosse because he's going to be the next lacrosse star, and everything has gotten more expensive. I really want to be on campus. We're so close to making it work, but I need about $8,000 more. And I might call and say, have we looked at our student loan options? How are we feeling about those? And oftentimes they get, I don't want to do that. Say, okay, let's talk about what $5,000 a year looks like actually in terms of payments when you graduate. And we do the math together and people see, oh, it's maybe a couple of $100s. I should be able to figure something like that out. So student or family say, we feel okay as we can about this $5,000. And I say, awesome. I feel great about adding a $3,000 grant. And so now we together have come up with that $8,000 that was needed to close a gap. We did it together. Oftentimes this is through conversations with students and families. It's great practice for students to advocate for themselves. It's great practice for families to work together. And a lot of times it can work out.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of Lisa's interview with Adrienne Amador-Oddi, VP of Enrollment at Queen's University in Charlotte. Hope you join us next week for part 2.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, this is my third or fourth interview on the podcast with a college president, but I've never done a 2-hour deep dive. But I found Bob McMahan fascinating and Kettering University fascinating. There's really no other school like it. And even if you don't think it's the right school for your student, it's just a school you should be aware of and how it functions just as an educated human being. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's a 5-parter. We chunk it out into 24-minute segments over the next 5 weeks, 5 Thursdays. In part 1, Bob gives his backstory. Bob gives us the history of Kettering. Bob explains Kettering's very unique approach to education. Bob explains how Kettering's co-op is different from all other co-op programs in the country. And Bob talks about the impressive ROI that Kettering graduates have. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I am here with Dr. Robert McMahan, who goes by Bob, and he's given me permission to call him Bob, and he's the president of Kettering University. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and as I was telling you off air, we have a co-host named Linda who's from Michigan. She got very, very excited when she found out I was doing this interview. You know, she grew up in Saginaw.
Oh, excellent. Not too far from here.
Yeah. But she's a big fan of Kettering, and she still calls it GMI. So you'll have to, share the history of when GMI, General Motors Institute, became Kettering. I'll let you get into all of that. But first thing I want you to do is just share your backstory. Walk us up, let us know your background. I know you've got a very interesting background at several other institutions. Walk us right up to what brought you to Kettering.
Well, as Steve Jobs always said, you can best connect the dots in reverse, and my career is kind of like that. I come at the presidency and to this institution from a lot of different places. I really have had a career that touches all 3 stools of the 3-legged stool that we talk about in higher education, and I'm delighted to be here at this point in time. This institution is truly a jewel in American higher education. I have always been a professor, always had students, always had research programs, et cetera, throughout my career. But over the course of that career, I've also started companies. I've run large companies. I've been a venture capitalist. I've helped found companies. I've also been in public policy in the state of North Carolina, so I helped develop the approach that the state uses to leverage universities and higher education to remake the economy of the state, and the state's been very successful in that. And then a good friend of mine several years ago called me and said, the presidency of Kettering is open, and you need to look at this because this is for you. And it truly was. It's a very good fit, and I've just been delighted to be here. I've now been president of the institution almost 14 years.
Wow. Well, that's a fascinating background. I see why they were drawn to you as a president, all the things you've done from entrepreneurship to educational leadership, venture capital. What other institutes of higher ed have you? I know you've been a professor. What other institutes of higher ed have you worked at?
I've worked at Dartmouth, at Harvard, at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, at Duke.
Wow.
Western Carolina, a number of institutions.
Wow. Good for you. Awesome. So, you tell us Kettering is special. What makes Kettering special? And also walk us through that history, because I probably threw people off with the whole GMI and Kettering.
Yeah.
So why don't you unpack that for us?
Okay. It's actually a fascinating history. The university was founded back in 1919 when Flint, Michigan, was actually the Silicon Valley of the United States. During that time, the automotive industry was really being created by groups of entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs whose names are now brands, right? We don't think of Chevrolet as being a person, but he was at that time a young man who was experimenting with these motorized carriages, and people like Dodge and Chrysler. These were all people. And the General Motors was founded in Flint, Michigan, not too far from where I now sit. The folks who created this industry and who were creating all these companies recognized very early on as literally tens of thousands of people flooded into this area from all over the world to work in these facilities. They realized that training and education were key to bringing all these people up and improving their ability to contribute and creating a talent pool for this new industry. And so they founded a school to do that. But because they had some very interesting ideas about education, Charles Kettering being one of them, who came from Dayton, Ohio, and had a role in creating the University of Cincinnati, Antioch, and some other programs. And there were a number of people also involved in the mining community in Michigan at the time, which had very strong apprenticeship programs. They had a very strong idea about how education should take place, and it wasn't the traditional model. They really understood long before others talked about soft skills and all the important things that people needed to learn. They really understood the difference between just learning something and mastering it. Charles Kettering was famous for saying, and I'm going to mangle the quote that he has, but he was famous for saying something akin to, if we educated musicians the way we educate engineers, we'd make them take 12 years of music theory before we ever let them touch a piano. But we don't do that, do we? We do both at the same time. We teach a fledgling musician, we teach them music theory, and we also teach them practice. And both of those sides informs the other and leads to mastery. And they had this idea very clearly that in order to educate somebody, you had to create a different model than existed. You needed to integrate fully practice with the education on an equal footing, on an equal basis, not just as we send a student off to experience the real world or to see what working in the real world is like, but really that they understood that there were a lot of things that a student needed to learn that they could not learn in the classroom, that they could only learn those things in the application of what they were learning in the classroom. And so they created an educational model right out of the chute that basically said half the time you're going to spend in class, half the time you're going to spend in professional roles in the disciplines that you want to that you're seeking a degree in. And they started and a lot of the early degree programs and courses of study were around engineering, because this was a very engineering-based business, and business. So they formed the institution in like I said, in 1919, and by about 1930, General Motors found that it was getting most of its leadership, most of the presidents, and CEOs, and CFOs, and chief engineers, and program managers, and all of those people were coming from this one place. And they made a very interesting strategic decision at the time, and that was to acquire the school. So they brought the school into the company, and from 1930 or so to about 1982, it was part of the company, and it was called General Motors Institute. And if you trace the lineage of people coming out of this university through that time, a large number of CEOs in the automotive industry and across a number of manufacturing industries came from this institution. In 1982, the company divested itself of the university, and the school became a private not-for-profit, like all of the, most other universities in the country. And in 1998, we were renamed from GMI to Kettering in honor of our founder, Charles Kettering.
So I have a question for that, Bob. Is the name changed? It could be, you do that when a founder comes in, especially if they give a big donation. That could be a reason, but it could also be a rebranding. If people could think General Motors Institute exclusively auto, and maybe you want to
Right.
rebrand and not only be thought of as just the place that cranks out automotive engineers or auto business. Were any of those factors, did they go into the rebranding, the moving from GMI to Kettering?
Absolutely, because when we moved away, when we became a private institution, we expanded what we were doing to a variety of industries. And although we have a very strong history in the automotive industry, we now have just as many students across industries. They are in electronics, they are in, semiconductors, they are in pharmaceuticals, biomedical instrumentation. I mean, the first biomedical engineer in the United States was a Kettering grad. A Kettering grad literally invented that discipline. They are in, we have students at Apple and SpaceX and all these companies across the country that are doing some of the most interesting and cutting edge and leading edge engineering and technology development. So yes, it very much was a recognition of the diversity of programs that we had and how the university has grown. But it was also fundamentally a recognition of the founder of the institution and the importance that his philosophy played in the development of the curriculum and the way that we educate. Because today we educate students in the same way. Our students, when they enter the university, they enter a rotation. When our freshman class comes to the campus they are divided more or less randomly, although they have the ability to change if they would like, them into two cohorts. What we call the A and the B sections of the university. And when the A students are in classes at the university, the B section are in professional roles, engineering, management, all sorts of professional roles, scientists in these organizations. And we work with over 450 companies and organizations across the globe to place our students and to have them have these experiences. Once one group is in class, the other group is in these professional roles, and then 12 weeks go by and they flip. The group that's in their placements are come back to campus, and the ones that are on campus go into those professional roles. And that rotation continues throughout their career. We don't have summer terms here. We don't take big blocks of time off. That rotation continues throughout the 4 to 4.5 years that the students are here to complete their degree. And when the students finally graduate, they not only leave us with a degree from one of the highest ranked undergraduate engineering and STEM programs in the country, but also with 2.5 years of professional experience in their fields, doing what they are trained to do and learning all of those things that you can only learn in the practice of your discipline, like teamwork and working in organizations, and how do you move ideas inside of a large organization or a small one, an entrepreneurial one. They take both of those things away with them when they graduate. And it's one of the reasons we are consistently ranked among the 4,000 or so universities in the United States. We're consistently ranked in the top 10 for preparing students for their careers, usually in the top 10 or 20 in terms of return on investment for their degree over their lifetime, and in the starting salaries, we have our students graduate with one of the highest starting salaries of any university in the country, and they carry that through their career. And by the way, when they're in their cooperative placements, they're earning money there too. We have students that earn 75, some even earn as high as $100,000 while they are students in these professional roles, and they can use those earnings to offset tuitions or other costs. So it's a very powerful formula, and it's unique in the United States. We're the only institution that operates in this way, and that produces the results that that arise from it.
So I have a question for you
Yeah,
because I love co-op, and I find families love co-op when you explain it to them. Here's a school you'll be familiar with, Waterloo University. My brother's a graduate
absolutely. Yeah.
of Waterloo, so I grew up with him co-oping all over the place. And then he got his master's at University of Denver, and he worked on implementing their co-op over there. But when people think of co-op, when they learn about it, they like it. But the schools that I'm asked about for co-op, Northeastern is probably the first school that people think of.
Right.
Drexel comes up quite a bit. Other schools come up on the East Coast like RIT and WPI. Georgia Tech comes up in the Southeast a lot. In the Midwest, certainly Cincinnati. They claim to be the founders of it. Cincinnati comes up a lot, and even Case Western Reserve comes up. But I'm not asked very often about Kettering in my just private counseling. So why are you guys flying under the radar? Because what you just described that is a more robust co-op program than all of those other programs. Those other programs are not like 50% co-op, 50% in
That's
class. Right. That's the most robust co-op program I've heard of. Why are you flying under the radar so much?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is. In fact, we all call these things co-op and or internships, and various institutions have various flavors of these programs, but they all represent very different experiences for students. Almost all universities that provide some form of a co-op experience for their students, it's voluntary, it doesn't apply to all students, and it isn't integrated into the curriculum. It's an experiential component. For us, it's very different. It is 100% of our students participate in this. It is integral to their education. They spend half of the time away from the university, half of the time in the university, and it is comprehensive in the fact that it is integrated into the curriculum. When you start with the notion that, if the 50-50 split is intentional, and what it says, if you think of it this way, is that half of what you need to learn, you can't learn in a university. You have to learn it somewhere else. But, and this is important, it's a part of your education. So the university is built to integrate what you learn in those roles back into what is happening on campus. And so the kinds of conversations that our students have in the classroom, the kinds of interactions that they have with their professors, is dramatically different than what you see at even the more robust co-op programs across the country. And as we started off, we talked about some of the institutions that I've been associated with in over my career. Those are some institutions, and they're excellent institutions, and they're institutions of significant reputation. I have never seen an institution that produces the consistent outcomes for students that this one does year after year. And it's the nature of the program, and it's the way that we educate. And as to why we fly below the radar, we're trying to change that, of course. But I think the answer to that question is because we were GMI for so many years. We're 100 years old, but while we were GMI, there wasn't the kind of marketing and awareness generation that occurred at most universities. So we're working very hard to let people know about this, because in today's discussion about higher education, I often find myself listening to programs on the radio and with a group of talking heads, and they're saying, well, if higher education were to be truly responsive to the needs of our society and our economy, they would work like this. And then they go into this long explanation about, well, they would have an integrated program where they worked with industries and they were sensitive to blah, 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 blah. They go into, and by the end of the discussion, I'm ready to throw a brick at the radio, because I said, That's us. You are describing us. This is not something that is prospective and is a what if. That's what we are. We do that every day, and we've been doing it for 100 years, and we're really good at it. And as a result, the outcomes for students are just incredible. I could spend the next hour going through, just from my memory, a litany of students who, graduated from our institution, and their first job out of as a graduate was not to find the coffee pot. Their first job was to lead a team of 20 engineers to transition a product line from Europe to the United States in a manufacturing facility, or to be a co-lead of an engineering group designing a new product for a company, or or starting, one of the most successful incubators in Silicon Valley is another one of our. It is an amazing story what these students go on to achieve, and it's because of what they experience here, I think, and I've seen it year after year and student after student. It's an incredible model.
Well, I can really attest to the fact that this is what parents want to hear. And so I'm sure as word gets out, interest is going to grow. I mean, I hear it all the time. Like, the backlash to the great financial crisis, a lot of it was, hey, if I'm going to spend all this money, I want to know that the ROI is there.
Yeah.
And you can show so much. And it just makes sense to people that they get to have real industry experience. One, to even confirm that this is what they really want to do before they get out and find out, oh, oops, this is miserable to me. That in of itself, but then you're burnishing your credentials. If you're a future employer, and I've seen this a lot with students that I've worked with, that do co-ops. North Carolina A&T is another one that
Hmm.
I've seen great results for. Wentworth in Boston. What happens is this. I'll talk to my students like in their junior year, and they already know where they're going to work because they had this great
Yeah.
co-op and they got an offer contingent on graduating, and parents love it, students love it, everybody loves it.
Yeah.
So I know the market is there. And I recently interviewed Kathleen Dulaski, author of the book Who Needs College Anymore? And it's not like it sounds. It's not who as in nobody needs it. It's who as in the right people. And part of she runs a educational design think tank. And part of what she's calling for is more of this, right? There's got to be more combination between real work experience and classroom. Like the market is just crying for this. So as you get the word out, I can't imagine it's not resonating with people. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Are you seeing a growth in applications and interest?
We are. We're seeing steady growth in interest in applications, especially as people outside of our normal catchment zone get to know us and get to understand what we represent. And your point, by the way, is a fantastic one, because one of the things I love about the model that we have is, I always say, to students, I say sometimes it's as important to understand what you don't want to do as it is what you want to do at this point in your career, because the practice of a discipline is often very different from the learning of the discipline. And how sad is it if you educate an electrical engineer and they go off and they spend 4 years in the classroom to graduate into a job, and they get to the job and 6 months later they say, I really don't like being an electrical engineer. I don't want to do this for my life. How sad is it to go through that entire curriculum and that entire education only to come out with a degree that actually doesn't represent what you want, what the direction that you want to take. And one of the benefits of the program that we have is that students get a deep experience in a domain, and they can change. We have students who come in and they've known their entire life that they wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And when they go out and they start being a mechanical engineer, they say, I don't really like this, but I really like chemical engineering. I really, really think this is what, and then they switch to a placement in that domain and say, I love it. This is what I want to do. And to your point, I always like to say our placement rate for students, the number of students who have a job or a graduate or acceptance to graduate school at the end of every year for each graduating class vacillates wildly between 99 and 100%. I mean, it is what is being demanded by families, is what's being demanded by our society in a very real sense. And you don't have to sacrifice the classical attributes of a college education in order to achieve it. It's not so much about how colleges need to change, I think, in some ways, how colleges need to change to be responsive. It's more like, how do they need to think about what they are doing in order to be responsive? It's not enough to simply provide a coming of age experience for students in the world in which we live now. It is, however, that's an important part of the experience for many, but it's also just as important to understand that there are economic implications to what they are doing here, and that they need to be equally well equipped to be a contributor in a way that benefits them and benefits society.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of 5, my interview with Bob McMahan, president for the last 14 years of Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. Hope you join us next week for part 2. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to have some tips for you for the personal statement, because that's what you rising singers should be doing right now, writing your personal statements. If you haven't done it already, I want to share those with you. And we'll have the final part of Dr. John Pollard's interview on Frankie Honors College at the University of Arizona. I'm getting great feedback on that, by the way. We'll also have a special opportunity Kevin Newton is extending to your college-bound kid listeners. We'll have that for you. And friends, remember, college is not a prize to be won. College is a match to be made. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escabel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.